The bell tolled once, then twice, its fading echo rolling through the hills of Thessaly like a final breath. Inside the convent, shadows clung to cracked frescoes where saints' faces had eroded into pale ghosts. Olive trees outside bent in the wind, their silver leaves trembling as if they sensed what the sisters already feared. Smoke drifted on the horizon, not the smoke of kitchens or fields, the harsh, rising column of war. Sister Eleni, the abbess, stood before the shrine with a silver crucifix lifted in both hands. The metal was old, dented by time, yet still bright enough to catch the dim chapel light. Near her, Sister Magdalena whispered a prayer under her breath, the youngest voice in a sanctuary built on centuries of quiet discipline. At the back, Sister Dearest, the eldest, traced the cracked wall where frescoes once glowed with color. All 22 women had gathered, each robe worn thin from years of work and winter. Beyond those walls, the countryside was fraying. Watchposts once manned now stood abandoned. Caravans of refugees passed on distant ridges, leading children by the hand, carrying what little remained of their lives. Ottoman raiding bands, a kinsai, restless and ruthless, moved along the frontier, exploiting every weakness. Local lords had withdrawn their guards. Taxes had stripped villages bare. Nothing protected convents anymore, only prayer and stone. By late afternoon, riders flickered into view, small at first, then larger, then undeniable. Red banners dragged in the wind, their crests catching the dying light, a warning that the empire's shadow had reached these hills. Inside the chapel, silence tightened. Sister Eleni lowered the crucifix and steadied her breath. "We remain," she declared. "We do not flee our vows." The bell sounded a final time. A hard crack thundered from the gates. Stones shifted. Dust rained from the rafters. Outside, the first blow against the convent wall landed like the opening note of a tragedy that none of them would escape. By nightfall, the walls shuddered beneath repeated strikes. Each impact sent tremors through the convent floor, shaking loose fragments of plaster and ancient paint. The sisters moved quickly through smoke and confusion. Torches outside roared against the wind, their flames scattering sparks that drifted through broken shutters. Inside the sanctuary, Sister Eleni lifted a chest from beneath the altar. Silver chalices, embroidered icons, and relic fragments clinked softly as she hid them behind a loose stone panel. Sister Magdalena carried 2 small manuscripts pressed to her chest, her hands shaking as the refectory windows shattered behind her. Firelight bled into the corridor, turning the air thick with soot. Near the gate, an Akinsai captain barked orders in a clipped, practiced rhythm. His men advanced methodically, clearing each room with brutal efficiency. An imperial detachment followed, marked by polished steel helmets that reflected the chaos in sharp glints. Their entry was swift, trained, and merciless. Historically, frontier convents faced 3 outcomes: ransom, forced allegiance, or removal into captivity. Tonight, none of those possibilities arrived gently. Wooden beams cracked under the strain. Doors splintered inward. The courtyard filled with shouting and steel. Sister Dearest locked the final chest of icons, her fingers steady despite the rising smoke. She whispered a psalm, then stepped back as soldiers flooded the hall. Torchlight glared across the stone floor. The metallic taste of fear settled on every tongue. One by one, the nuns were seized, wrists bound with rough rope. Outside, the final wall buckled, collapsing into rubble. Flames crawled along the roof, devouring the place that had shaped their lives. At dawn, 22 women stood in the courtyard, bound and silent. Behind them, the convent smoldered into ash. Ahead lay a road that had swallowed countless captives before them. The march began with the rising sun, its first light revealing a line of bound women surrounded by mounted guards. Dust clung to their torn robes as they stepped onto the narrow road that cut toward the Thessalian lowlands. Each footfall stirred memories of the chapel they had left behind, now nothing more than smoke curling against the morning sky. Heat intensified by midday. Sister Magdalena staggered more than once, her breath thin and uneven. Sister Dearest steadied her each time, whispering fragments of chants once sung during Vespers. The older women kept the rhythm of faith alive in their steps, each word a fragile thread holding the group together. Along the roadside, villagers peeked from shuttered homes, faces pale with dread. None dared intervene, yet some placed water jugs near the path. Others hid bread beneath stones, hoping the captives might snatch a piece when the guards looked away. A traveling merchant paused, lowered his gaze, and muttered a blessing no one acknowledged aloud. Fear ruled every gesture. 2 days. Into the march, foreign envoys crossed their path. A Venetian agent attempted to speak with the commander, offering coin for the release of a few names listed in his ledger. The captain refused. These women, he stated, were imperial property now. Their fates belonged to registers already being prepared in distant offices. By the 5th day, the sisters moved like shadows, lips cracked from thirst, hands swollen against the ropes, yet solidarity remained. When one faltered, another shielded her from the guards' impatience. When hunger gnawed, Sister Eleni, gone now but remembered, echoed in their minds, "If you cannot hold the cross, hold each other." Near twilight on the 6th day, the scent of salt reached them. The distant cry of gulls drifted over the hills. The sea appeared at dawn, a wide expanse of blue that promised nothing except separation from the world they knew. At the port of Volos, Ottoman ships waited with open hulls. The women were driven aboard and chained to wooden benches worn smooth by previous transports. Iron cuffs rang against timber as the final ropes tightened. From the deck, the coastline shrank. Villages, forests, and hills dissolved into haze. What remained was the ocean, vast, indifferent, and carrying them toward a city that would decide their futures through ink, law, and power. 12 days later, the Bosphorus opened before them like a gateway carved from silver and stone. Constantinople rose on the horizon, its domes catching the first rays of dawn. Minarets pierced the sky, towers reflected on the water, and the city's vast silhouette expanded with each slow pull of the oars. What had once been the center of Christendom now stood crowned by the power that conquered it. Upon docking, the sisters were herded into narrow streets bursting with life. Merchants shouted from stalls, soldiers crossed in formation, and foreign slaves carried goods toward the palace districts. Crowds paused as the group passed. 22 veiled captives, robes torn, wrists bound. A rare sight even in a city built on conquest. The procession halted at the gates of the Imperial Council. The divan chamber loomed with towering columns and polished marble floors. Scribes sat in ordered rows, waiting with ink and parchment. Translators positioned themselves along the wall, prepared to record names, ages, and intended uses. At the center, the Grand Vizier remained motionless, his expression carved from stone. Through an interpreter, the terms were announced with cold precision. Conversion offered stability. Servitude offered survival. Refusal granted nothing except disappearance into the empire's unmarked depths. These choices had governed countless captives before them, codified by custom and sealed by bureaucracy. Sister Dearest stepped forward first. Her voice carried the calm of decades spent in prayer. She addressed the council with a resolve that drew murmurs from the scribes. Behind her, Sister Magdalena trembled but did not retreat. The others maintained a unified stillness, each decision tied to the next. When the council session ended, guards escorted them toward the palace complex. Through courtyards and corridors, past fountains and carved arches, they descended into the lower chambers of Topkapi. Here, the air changed. Light filtered through thin slits carved into stone. The sound of the city faded into a distant hum. Their new quarters formed a labyrinth beneath the gardens, narrow rooms with straw mats, water jars filled once each day, iron rings fixed to walls for those deemed disobedient. This was not a dungeon, but a space designed to reshape identity through labor and silence. By nightfall, numbers replaced their names. Registers recorded their presence, not their stories. The corridors grew colder as the doors closed behind them. In that suffocating darkness, a new chapter of captivity began, one built not on fire and conquest, but on routine, persuasion, and the slow erosion of the self. The first gesture came quietly, like a hand extended in darkness. Days after the sisters were lowered into the stone chambers beneath the palace, food arrived that did not match the misery surrounding them. Bowls of lentils instead of scraps, fresh water instead of the bitter, metallic drips from the cistern. A eunuch, dressed in muted silk, stepped into the hall accompanied by two learned men. Their robes rustled softly against the stone as they approached the women with an air of practiced gentleness. For a moment, the sisters believed a mistake had been made. Mercy had returned. Hope flickered like a candle struggling against drafts. Warm words followed. "Your devotion is admirable," one of the scholars murmured. "You may find peace here," another offered, placing a folded linen cloth on the floor. The palace understood the architecture of surrender, kindness first, hunger later. By the second week, gifts appeared, bundles of silk, small jars of oil, fresh bread carried on a brass tray. Sister Magdalena, once trembling, stared at the offerings with a mixture of longing and distrust. Sister Dearest, older and sharp of mind, warned the others. "Mercy is a tool," she whispered, "not a reprieve." Arguments filled the dim chamber that night. Some believed acceptance would save lives. Others saw surrender as the slow burial of their identity. The twins from Corfu debated quietly in the corner. They had come to the convent together and feared separation more than anything the palace could threaten. Their choice arrived first. When the scholars returned and offered a path out, new names, new clothes, new service, the sisters hesitated. The twins stepped forward. Fear carved deep lines into their faces, but survival tightened their resolve. They whispered the phrase demanded of them, not loudly, not proudly, barely more than breath. The scribes wrote quickly, sealing their fate with ink that has survived centuries. By morning they were gone, delivered into palace service. No one saw them again. The following days unraveled the mask of mercy. Food portions shrank. Oil lamps vanished. The linen cloths were taken back. Silence replaced the gentle voices. Then came the coercion. Scribes waited in a narrow room carved like a throat into the stone. Each sister was brought forward one at a time. A translator stood between them, eyes lowered, repeating the same command with mechanical precision. "Speak the phrase, accept the order of the Sultan, live." Few answered. Most stood silent. Those who resisted were returned to the chambers without explanation. Others disappeared, removed into silence so complete that even the palace walls offered no echo. A ledger entry from the imperial archives contains a distant reference: foreign women, non-compliant, reassigned. No dates, no names, only erasure. Half the sisters vanished within months. Those who remained carved small crosses into the clay beside their sleeping mats. Fingernails dug grooves, knuckles bled, faith hardened. Sister Dearest, once the boldest, embraced silence completely. When guards demanded her name, she whispered only, "Call me Silence." One night, while sweeping the far wall of the chamber, Sister Magdalena discovered a seam in the stone. Dust fell away to reveal an arch sealed long ago. Together, the survivors pried it open with fragments of broken pottery. Behind it lay a small, forgotten room, cold and untouched by the palace above. It became their chapel. A fragment of clay for an altar, a scrap of linen for a cloth, shadows for witnesses. In that chamber, mercy failed to break them, and silence became their final defiance. Across the hills of Thessaly and the plains stretching toward Macedonia, the fate of convents diverged like threads torn from the same cloth. Some vanished entirely. Others endured in altered forms, reshaped by negotiation, geography, or necessity. The sisters beneath Topkapi represented only one story in a wider landscape of faith under strain. In the coastal village of Ankylos, a convent survived because its abbess negotiated directly with a local sipahi. The community provided herbal medicine to nearby garrisons, a service valuable enough to shield its walls. In exchange, the convent paid a yearly tax recorded in crisp Ottoman handwriting, 2 baskets of dried sage, 1 of lavender, and coin equivalent to a month's grain ration. In the mountains near Trikala, another house was emptied within a single day. Chroniclers later described how its lands were seized and redistributed to cavalry families. The sisters vanished into port records at Galata, listed among dozens of captives destined for labor. Such variation was not chaos. It was policy shaped by pragmatism. Archival petitions from the Ecumenical Patriarchate show attempts to preserve communal lands, request reduced taxation, or negotiate the return of certain captives. Some petitions succeeded, others were ignored. Venetian and Genoese port manifests confirmed the movement of ransomed women across the Aegean. A 15th-century record from Chios lists 6 religious women taken from Thessaly returned through foreign mediation. Children faced their own roads. Orphan girls often entered informal foster networks that crossed borders and faith lines. A merchant from Epirus recorded taking in a young girl whose family had been lost in a raid. Years later, she reappeared in a marriage contract preserved in Venetian archives, identifying herself only as Anna, daughter of no known father. Other children were carried south in caravans. Some appeared in ship manifests as redeemed persons, marked with faint circles around their names, a symbol used by Genoese clerks for individuals whose ransoms were paid by guilds or parish communities. Scattered through these records are flashes of human courage. A neighbor slipping a child under a hay cart to hide her. A priest smuggling a bone relic inside a loaf of bread. A mother offering her wedding ring to secure her daughter's Relia. See, the world they inhabited was neither wholly merciful nor entirely cruel. It was fractured. Administrative order overlapped with human impulse. Markets stood beside orphanages, ledgers beside icons. The empire balanced conquest with utility, domination with occasional accommodation. For the sisters trapped beneath the palace, these distant stories offered no comfort. Yet they echo a truth historians have learned through fragments. Faith did not vanish. It adapted. It retreated into corners. It whispered through loopholes in law and memory. As the sisters knelt inside their hidden chapel, lighting their crude candles, the world outside continued its uneven rhythm. Some houses protected, others erased, all caught between the machinery of empire and the resilience of those who refused to let faith die. Trauma did not end when the raids stopped or when the palace doors closed behind the sisters. It endured in the quiet moments, in breaths drawn during sleepless nights, in memories that refused to fade. For the 11 who remained beneath Topkapi, survival became a series of small choices stitched together across days that blurred into months. Sister Magdalena, once the youngest and most fragile, grew into the quiet anchor of the group. With a piece of charcoal salvaged from a brazier, she began marking symbols on the chapel walls. Each bird represented a sister still alive. Each flame honored one who had disappeared. Over time, the birds grew fewer. The flames multiplied. Far from the palace, refugees rebuilt lives in the shattered countryside. A widow from the outskirts of Larissa remarried out of necessity, not affection. Her new marriage contract, preserved in a notarial record, lists her as Eleni, widow, with diminished kin. The phrase appears in documents of the era to acknowledge those who lost entire families to conflict. Such stories reveal the dispersed consequences of frontier warfare. Families fractured. Villages emptied. Legal identities shifted under the millet system, which granted limited autonomy but imposed new layers of obligation. Women navigated this system with ingenuity. Some used church courts to reclaim property. Others secured dowries through negotiated settlements. A few, like a girl raised by a foster household in Epirus, left behind only a note in a land deed. She recalls a bell from a home she cannot name. Inside the palace, the sisters continued their ritual of survival. Their chapel grew into a sanctuary built on whispered memories. One spoke of bread rising at dawn in their lost refectory. Another remembered the chill of winter on the convent steps. These recollections became liturgy, familiar enough to anchor them, painful enough to bind them. Beyond the palace walls, cultural memory also bent beneath the weight of loss. Monastic libraries preserved laments written in hurried hands, describing the day the bells fell silent and the flame that took the chapel roof. Oral traditions carried fragments of songs about vanished sisters whose names dissolved into myth. Pilgrims visiting Constantinople decades later wrote of rumors whispered by palace servants. Some claimed to hear faint hymns rising from foundations where no chapel existed. One Italian traveler described passing a corridor where the air smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, though no fire burned. The empire's administrative machine documented none of this directly. Its registers tell a different story: rations, taxes, transfers, and the occasional notation of foreign women integrated into service. These bureaucratic lines reveal patterns that historians decode decades or centuries later. They show how communities adapted, how women negotiated rights, how new households formed from the ashes of the old. Yet some traces defy paperwork. Archaeologists excavating beneath Topkapi uncovered stone walls scratched with crosses, faint but deliberate. A fragment of an icon was found embedded in plaster. Nearby, a ledger gap, 21 blank spaces where entries should have been, offers its own silent testimony. Erasure itself becomes evidence. Memory lingered not in grand monuments but in absence, in blank archives, in scratched symbols beneath the earth. The sisters' secret chapel endured as long as their bodies could. One by one, illness, age, and slow starvation thinned their ranks. Sister Dearest, once steadfast in her vow of silence, collapsed during winter and was carried to the far corner of the chamber. Her breath left with a quiet exhale, witnessed only by those who shared her captivity. Sister Magdalena marked her passing with a small flame on the wall. It glowed faintly in lamplight, a symbol of resistance preserved in charcoal. Those who survived the longest became living repositories of memory. They carried names, prayers, fragments of hymns, and the weight of every disappearance. When one of them stumbled during labor duty, another lifted her arm. When hunger hollowed their faces, they shared crumb. Their bond became a final act of defiance against a system designed to dissolve identity. Human survival in the aftermath of conquest rarely appears in chronicles. It appears in gestures: a woman sharing a crust of bread, a widow rewriting her life, a child recalling the chime of a bell. These moments form the quiet architecture of endurance. And beneath the palace, the echoes of prayer continued, faint but unbroken, long after most of the world forgot the women who whispered them. The centuries that followed reshaped the city above the sisters' hidden chapel, yet certain stones carried traces of their presence. Istanbul's layered streets now weave over foundations that once held their silence. Minarets cast shadows across courtyards where processions once passed, and museum halls display fragments of pottery left behind by unknown hands. Modern scholarship retrieved the outlines of their story through scattered documents, petitions requesting leniency, ransoms negotiated across seas, household inventories listing lost daughters, and ledgers with blank spaces where names should have been. Each fragment restores a sliver of lives nearly dissolved by time. Their legacy rests not in grand monuments, but in persistence. Conquest transformed private lives into instruments of empire. Institutions balanced cruelty with pragmatic mercy. Women maneuvered within systems that tried to define their worth, reshaping identity through resilience. The sisters beneath the palace stand as symbols of this endurance. Their secret chapel, once hidden by stone and darkness, now survives in archaeological reports and museum displays. A faint carved cross, barely visible on a recovered block of masonry, captures their defiance. Its lines are uneven, but its message is unwavering. Remembering them carries responsibility. To witness their story is to acknowledge lives silenced not by lack of courage, but by the machinery of their time. It is to stand against erasure. It is to reclaim names withheld by ink. Support the preservation of archives. Protect the fragile manuscripts that hold these histories. Share the stories of women whose voices were nearly lost. Comment with the detail that struck your heart. Help keep these memories alive. Their prayers once rose in darkness. Their hymns once echoed beneath stone. Their marks on the wall refused to fade. Let the faint carved cross endure not only in ruins, but in the minds of those who hear this story now. Let it remain a witness across centuries, a reminder that even in the harshest silence, faith, identity, and memory can survive.